"You'll regret this, I won't obey," the Apache girl said when the blacksmith paid $2. The wind howled across the desert, carrying dust and the promise of a new day. The small workshop, hidden away in the outskirts of town, stood still and quiet except for the clinking sound of metal against metal. Cade, the blacksmith, worked alone in his space, the glow from the forge casting long shadows on the walls. His hands, rough and calloused from years of working with steel, moved with precision as he shaped another piece of armor. He didn't mind the solitude. It was his way of life, and he was good at it. Cade had no desire to be part of the world's growing chaos. The corporations had taken over most of the land, their greedy hands stretching across the plains, mining resources from the earth, while the people who once called the land home were pushed to the fringes. He didn't like the corporate leaders who ruled with an iron fist, and he didn't care for the lawmen who blindly followed their commands. Cade worked in his forge, creating weapons, tools, and armor for those who needed it, but didn't ask questions about where they came from. The day had started like any other, but that all changed when the door creaked open. Cade looked up from his work, the hammer in his hand pausing in midair. A figure stood in the doorway, her silhouette dark against the bright light of the outside world. She was tall, with dark wind-blown hair, and her eyes, sharp-focused, looked straight through him. "Sakari." She stepped inside, her boots kicking up dust as she crossed the threshold. Her clothing was simple but rugged, a worn brown jacket and a pair of pants that had seen their share of battles. She didn't seem to care about the heat or the dust of the desert. She wore it all like it was part of her. Cade's eyes narrowed as he took her in. There was something about her that made him uneasy. He didn't like strangers, especially those who didn't speak first, but something about her presence, the way she carried herself, made it clear she wasn't here to buy one of his creations. "You the blacksmith?" she asked, her voice steady with a hint of suspicion. "That's right," Cade replied, setting his hammer down on the anvil. He didn't offer her a greeting or a seat. He wasn't one for pleasantries. "What can I do for you?" Then she spoke again, her words cutting through the silence. "I've been sold," she said, her voice calm but laced with bitterness. "For $2. She spat on the floor, her face hardening with anger. $2? That was an insult. He had heard stories of people being sold like cattle, but he didn't expect it to happen so close to home. He had seen the corporations tear apart villages and take people for labor, but he thought that only happened far away, in the places where the law had no control.
"Who sold you?" Cade asked, his tone now more serious.
"A traitor." "Not much more than a thief," she said, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "But I won't be anyone's property. Not again." Cade stood up straight, studying her carefully. She wasn't like the others he had seen. Her defiance, the way she held herself, it was like she didn't fear anyone. And he liked that about her. It was a rare thing in a world full of people too scared to speak their minds. "Sounds like you need a way out," Cade said, his voice calm but firm. "If you're asking for my help, I don't come cheap." Sakari stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes never leaving his. "I didn't come here for charity," she said, her voice cold. "I came for freedom. And if you think you can buy my loyalty for a few dollars, you'll regret it. I didn't pay for loyalty, I paid for freedom. You can walk away if you want, but the world outside won't be kind to you. If you stay, you'll work for your keep, same as anyone else." Sakari stepped closer, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. "I didn't ask for your help, blacksmith, but I'll take it, for now." Cade nodded, turning back to his workbench where a half-finished piece of metal lay. He knew she wasn't going to make things easy, but he hadn't expected her to. She wasn't like the others who came to him for help. There was a fire in her, something untamed and wild. He wasn't sure what had brought her to him, but he felt it was more than just a chance encounter. As the hours passed, Cade continued his work, the rhythmic sounds of the forge filling the air. Sakari watched him for a while, silent and unmoving, as though she was weighing her options. She didn't speak much, and Cade didn't push her, but he could tell she was thinking. She was strong, that much was clear, and the fire in her eyes told him she wasn't someone to be underestimated. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fiery reds and oranges, Sakari broke the silence. "You won't get what you expect from me," she said, her voice low but steady. "I don't follow anyone's orders, not even you."
He had heard worse threats.
"I'm not asking you to follow me, but you'll work or you'll leave. That's the deal." For a moment she said nothing. Then, with a soft exhale, she nodded. "Fine, I'll work. But don't think for a second that I'll obey you." Cade looked up from his work, meeting her gaze. He didn't say anything, but something in her eyes told him this was just the beginning of their partnership. Neither of them trusted the other, not yet, But there was something in the air, something unspoken, that hinted at the journey ahead. A journey neither of them had asked for, but both of them would soon have no choice but to face. And so, with the dying light of the day fading into darkness, the blacksmith and the Apache girl stood together in that small, dimly lit workshop, two strangers, bound by a deal neither of them fully understood. The days passed quietly, but the tension between Cade and Sakari remained thick. She worked without complaining, but there was a fire in her eyes that never left. She didn't trust Cade, and Cade didn't trust her. They both knew it. The blacksmith worked in his forge every day, the heat from the fire warming his face as he shaped steel and iron. Sakari, on the other hand, spent her time outside, keeping to herself. She didn't speak much, only offering short answers when Cade asked her something. He respected her silence, but there was a part of him that wished she would talk more, if only to understand what was going on inside her mind. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of purple and orange, Sakari returned to the workshop. Cade was finishing a new piece of armor, his hands moving quickly and efficiently. He didn't look up when she entered, used to her quiet nature by now. "You're making that for someone else, aren't you?" Sakari's voice cut through the silence. Cade stopped what he was doing and turned his eyes toward her. There was something different in her tone today, something soft but still defiant. "Maybe," he replied, setting down the piece of metal he had been working on. "I make armor for anyone who pays." Doesn't matter who they are. Sakari crossed her arms and leaned against the doorway. Her dark eyes watched him carefully. "You're always busy with that work, but I don't see you using your own armor. Are you that afraid of the world outside?" Cade's expression hardened. He didn't like being questioned, especially about things that were personal. But something about her made him want to explain himself. "I don't wear armor because I don't need to. I've lived this way long enough to know how to protect myself without it." Sakari studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she thought about his words. "You're not afraid of the world, are you? You just don't care. You hide away in this workshop because you don't want to face what's out there." Cade didn't respond immediately. They didn't know if what she said was true, but it hit close to home. He had spent years alone, keeping to himself, avoiding the chaos outside his forge. The world had changed, and he didn't want to be part of it. It wasn't fear, it was a choice. Sakari pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer to the forge. "You might be able to hide here, but it doesn't change what's happening out there. You can't stay here forever." Cade stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his leather apron. "I don't plan to stay here forever, but when you've seen as much as I have, you learn that sometimes it's better to be alone." She shook her head, almost pityingly. "The world's a mess, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to give up on it. You can't just turn your back on people." Cade wasn't sure what to say. He had turned his back on people for years. It was easier that way, but looking at her, standing there with her defiance and strength, something inside him stirred. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. Sakari wasn't broken by the world. She wasn't afraid to fight, to stand up for herself. "You really think you can change things?" Cade finally asked, his voice low. Sakari didn't hesitate. "I don't know. But I won't just sit around and wait for someone else to fix it." Cade looked at her for a long moment. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Most people just accepted the world for what it was. They didn't try to fight back, didn't try to change anything. But Sakari wasn't like that. She fought for what she believed in, and Cade found himself wondering if maybe he could do the same. For the first time, Cade felt a little less alone in this world. The next few days brought more quiet moments between them, but there was a change in the air. They no longer ignored each other, but worked together with a new sense of understanding. It wasn't easy. Sakari's independence and defiance were clear, and Cade's desire to keep to himself still lingered. But something about working side by side in the quiet of the desert was different now. There was an unspoken respect between them. One morning as the sun began to rise, Cade stepped outside the workshop, the heat of the day already beginning to make the air shimmer. He stretched his arms, feeling the tension in his muscles as he took in the view. The desert was vast and empty, but Cade had always found comfort in its stillness. It was the one place that didn't ask anything of him. Sakari was already out there, sitting on a large rock with her legs crossed, staring out into the horizon. The way she looked out at the world, so focused and quiet, made Cade wonder what she was thinking. "Why don't you ever sit down?" Sakari asked, her voice carrying through the silence. Cade glanced over at her and then back at the horizon. I've never been the sitting type. It was more like she understood him in a way that no one else had. I guess we're both stubborn." He knew she was right. He had been running from the world for years, hiding away from things he didn't want to face. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. Sakari stood up from the rock and stretched her arms. "You're not so bad, Blacksmith. I didn't think I'd be saying that when I first got here, but I'll admit it. You know how to make a good weapon." "I didn't know you cared about weapons." "I don't," Sakari said with a grin, "but I care about what they can do." Cadet felt a spark of something inside him. An old feeling. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The world was a mess, and things were getting worse. But maybe, just maybe, together they could do something about it. Later that day, they heard news of a convoy passing through the area. It was a group of traders, headed by one of the corporations Cade despised. Cade's heart sank at the thought of more people being exploited, but Sakari's eyes lit up with determination. "They're headed straight for my village's old land," she said, her voice hardening. "I'll stop them."
We can't let them take more.
Cade's instinct was to pull back, to stay out of it. But something about the way Sakari spoke made him pause. She wasn't just looking to fight. She was looking to stop the cycle of destruction that had been going on for too long. "Are you sure?" Cade asked, meeting her gaze. She nodded, a fire in her eyes. "I'm sure." Cade looked at her for a long moment, and then, without saying another word, he grabbed his gear and joined her. For the first time in years, Cade felt like maybe he wasn't just hiding from the world. Maybe, just maybe, he was about to fight for it. The sun rose higher in the sky, its heat searing down onto the barren land as Kade and Sakari prepared for what lay ahead. They had heard word of a convoy, a group of traders passing through, backed by the corporate forces that had taken so much from the land. Sakari's resolve was clear, her eyes set with a fierce determination as she strapped on her weapons. Cade, usually a man of few words, found himself silently admiring her strength. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the land, for her people, and for the freedom that had been stripped away. They hadn't spoken much in the past few hours, the silence between them heavy with anticipation. Cade kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, his thoughts a whirl of uncertainty. He had always avoided conflict, preferring to keep his distance. But something about Sakari stirred something in him, something that told him this time was different. Kade adjusted the strap of his weapon, a custom-made rifle that had been sitting in his workshop for years, untouched. He didn't have much use for it, but today was different. Today the stakes were higher. The convoy wasn't just passing through. They were bringing with them equipment and resources that would continue to fuel the corporation's grip on the land. And Sakari wouldn't let that happen. "We'll need to move quickly," Sakari said, breaking the silence as she tightened the straps of her boots. Her voice was low, steady, but there was a fire in it that Kade couldn't ignore. She wasn't just angry. She was driven by something deeper. "We don't have much time." Kade nodded, feeling the weight of his own weapon as he checked it one last time. "I know. Let's get this done." They mounted their horses, the animals steady and calm, as if they too understood the importance of the task ahead. Cade had always trusted his horses. They were loyal, strong, and unafraid. He could feel their power beneath him as they galloped across the desert, the wind rushing past him, whipping at his face. Sakari rode beside him, her horse moving with a quiet grace that mirrored her own strength. The convoy was still a few miles away, but they could see the dust rising in the distance. The traders were close. Cade's heart began to pound in his chest. He had never been one for ambushes, never been one to take risks. But this was no ordinary mission. Sakari had made it clear that this was about more than just stopping a convoy. This was about standing up to the system that had enslaved their people, that had taken away everything they held dear. As they neared the convoy's location, Sakari raised a hand, signaling for Cade to stop. They hid behind a large rock formation, the shadows offering them some cover. From their vantage point, they could see the convoy moving steadily along the dirt path, unaware of the two riders who were now watching them.
They won't know what hit them, Sakari muttered, her voice barely a whisper.
Cade watched the convoy, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. He had learned the hard way to always be cautious. But today, with Sakari at his side, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just a blacksmith anymore. He wasn't just someone who hid away in the safety of his workshop. He was part of something bigger. The convoy came closer, and Sakari moved into position. Kade followed, his heart beating faster with every step. As the convoy reached the point where they would strike, Sakari gave him a nod. With a swift motion, she charged forward, her horse kicking up the dust as she rode straight for the convoy. Katie was right behind her, rifle in hand, his gaze focused on the mercenaries guarding the traders. They were well armed, but they didn't expect an attack. They didn't expect 2 riders to come out of the desert to stop them. The first shot rang out, the sound echoing in the still air. Cade's bullet struck one of the mercenaries, knocking him off his feet. Sakari was quick to follow, her bow drawn, and her arrow finding its mark in another mercenary's chest. The others scrambled, shouting orders, but it was too late. Cade and Sakari had already taken control of the situation. Cade moved with precision, his training in using weapons kicking in as he moved from one target to the next. His rifle was steady in his hands as he picked off the mercenaries one by one, each shot calculated, each movement deliberate. Sakari, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of energy. She moved faster than the eye could follow, her bow and arrows taking down her targets with ease. The 2 of them were a perfect team, their movements in sync as they wiped out the mercenaries guarding the convoy. As the last of the mercenaries fell, Kade stood there, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. Sakari stood beside him, her expression calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. She wasn't smiling, but Cade could see the satisfaction in the way she held herself. She had done what she set out to do. "They won't be bothering anyone anymore," she said, her voice low but firm. "We've stopped them." He had expected the fight to be more difficult, but they had done it. They had taken down the convoy with little resistance. And now, the land was just a little bit freer. But there was still work to be done. They weren't done yet. The corporations had far more power than just this convoy, and there were still people out there who needed to be freed. Cade and Sakari weren't finished, not by a long shot. "We should move quickly," Cade said, turning his gaze back to the convoy. The traders had already begun to scatter, afraid of what had just happened. They wouldn't stop until they had their revenge. "The corporate forces will be looking for us." Sakari nodded. "Let them come. I've waited long enough to fight back." They mounted their horses again, the sounds of the battle behind them, fading into the distance. Cade looked at Sakari, his heart heavy with the weight of what they had done, but also with a sense of hope. They had just begun a fight that had been too long in the making. Together, they would stand against the corporations and everything they represented. As they rode off into the desert, Cade couldn't help but feel that the world was starting to change. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger. The land was still alive with possibilities, and he and Sakari were ready to fight for it. The days following the ambush were filled with silence. The wind whispered across the desert, the dust settling into the cracks of the earth, as though even the land was catching its breath. Cade and Sakari had taken refuge in the shadows of a distant canyon, hidden from the world for now. They had done what they set out to do, stop the convoy from delivering the resources to the corporation, but their victory was far from over. They knew the battle they had started was just one small part of something much larger. Cade sat by the campfire, his eyes staring into the flames as the soft crackling of burning wood filled the air. The evening was cool, the stars beginning to take their places in the night sky. He was used to solitude, but this time, it was different. This time, there was a partner beside him, a partner who shared his burden in ways he never thought possible. Sakari, the Apache girl who had once spurned his help, now sat across from him. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a constant reminder that they were in this together. Sakari was sharpening her arrows, her movements smooth and focused. The campfire flickered in her dark eyes as she worked. She was always alert, always watching, always prepared for what might come next. Cade respected that. He admired her for it. Her strength had become more than just physical. Her resolve, her refusal to let the world break her, had awakened something in him, something he hadn't realized was there. "What's next?" Cade finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, steady. Sakari paused for a moment, the tip of her arrow hovering just above the stone she was using to sharpen it. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "We keep moving," she said simply. "The world won't stop because we fought one battle. The corporations will send more people. They'll keep trying to take what isn't theirs." Cade nodded, the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. He had always been good with weapons, good with his hands, but this fight against something so much bigger was different. He wasn't sure if they could win, but with Sakari at his side, he was willing to try. "We can't fight them all alone," Cade said. "There are too many of them, too many people under their control." Sakari didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, but there was something in them, something fierce, something unyielding, that Cade couldn't ignore. "Then we don't fight alone. We find others. We find people who are ready to stand up. We gather them, and we show them that they don't have to live under their rule." Cade looked at her for a long moment. There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. She believed it, and for the first time in a long time, Cade found himself starting to believe it too. They could change things. Together, they could build something stronger than just the two of them. "We need to move," Sakari said, standing up and dusting off her pants. "The corporate forces will come looking for us soon. We can't waste time." The fire between them had shifted. There was something more now, something beyond just survival. They had begun to fight for something worth more than their own lives. They were fighting for the land, for freedom, for something they both knew was worth risking everything. The next few days were spent traveling through the rugged terrain, moving quickly and quietly. They didn't speak much. Sakari kept to herself, focused on the land around them, while Katie watched the skies for any signs of danger. They had to keep moving. The corporate forces would send their soldiers soon, and they had to stay ahead of them. Katie had never been good at leading others. He had always worked alone, hidden in his workshop, forging weapons and armor for those who needed it. But now, with Sakari at his side, things were different. She had shown him how to fight, not just for survival, but for a cause. She had shown him what it meant to stand up for something greater than oneself. As they crossed the barren desert, Katie couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were trying to do. They weren't just fighting for freedom. They were fighting for something more. They were fighting for a future, for a chance to build something better. They weren't just standing up against the corporations. They were standing up against everything that had tried to crush them, to force them into submission. One evening, as the stars twinkled above them and the fire crackled in the distance, Cade finally spoke again. "I've spent my whole life running," he said quietly, "hiding from the world, hiding from people. I thought if I stayed out of it, if I kept to myself, everything would be fine. But now I see. Maybe hiding isn't the answer. Maybe it's time to face what's coming." Sakari didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her eyes calm and steady. Finally she spoke. "You can't change the past," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you can change what happens next. You can fight for what's right, or you can let the world decide for you. The choice is yours." Cade looked at her, the weight of her words settling deep within him. He had always believed that he was just a man, one man in a world full of people who didn't care. But Sakari had shown him that one man could make a difference. One man could stand up, could fight, could change the world if he had the courage to do so. They continued their journey, moving swiftly, avoiding the corporate patrols and the soldiers sent to hunt them down. They made their way through towns, meeting people along the way who were tired of living under the corporation's rule. Each time they stopped, more joined them, people who had lost their homes, their families, their freedom to the greed of the corporate forces. With each new person that joined them, Cade felt a sense of hope grow inside him. He wasn't just one man anymore. He was part of something bigger. They were building an army, a force that could stand up to the corporations and take back what was rightfully theirs. As they moved closer to their destination, a place where they would make their stand, Cade looked at Sakari once more. She was still the same fierce woman he had met days ago, but now there was something different about her. She wasn't just a warrior, she was a leader. And with her by his side, Cowboy felt ready for whatever came next. The final battle would come. They knew it, but Cowboy no longer feared it. Together they would fight. Together they would change the world. And with that, they rode into the night, their path clear ahead of them. The dawn of a new day was near, and with it, the hope that they could win the fight for freedom.